The woman France had come to hate was doomed before the blade even touched her neck. Concluding, her life was insufficient. Her identity had to be erased and transformed into a humiliating public spectacle. Marie Antoinette, the once dazzling Archduchess of Austria, was now had to walk the road backward from the splendor of a golden throne to the rough wooden cart destined for the condemned. Her laughter had once illuminated the halls of Versailles. Subscribe if you're intrigued to actual historical events where innocence is silently lost. It's not a myth. It's the gradual disintegration of a young lady that the world has chosen to despise. Marie Antoinette was simply a young girl, scared, alone, and already doomed, before the screams and the blade. Stay with me and leave a comment from where you are viewing, because the tragedy wasn't her execution. It was much worse than what came before it. Paris was torn from her family's embrace in the early hours of August 2, 1793, while she was still hiding beneath a thick hush. She was taken away from her children and refused even a little moment of solace before being sent to the Conciergerie, a gloomy, damp prison that Parisians darkly referred to as the Guillotine's waiting room. Only prisoner number 280 remained. The queen had vanished. Rats, perspiring stone walls, and 2 unblinking guards made up her new court. Every little attempt at dignity was thwarted, and every action was captured on camera. Under the ceiling's continuous dripping, the hours blended together with the muted murmurs of other inmates waiting for their turn outside. Another story was being told within that cell as the revolution roared outside those walls, and those who had previously bowed before her silks now called for her execution. The narrative of the woman who created the emblem. Before she reached the scaffold, a woman was made to confront not just death but also a purposeful attempt to break her spirit. This is the account of what they did to Marie Antoinette prior to her execution by guillotine. A tale where dignity and humiliation collided, and where she unexpectedly found her ultimate crown in the silent perseverance of pain. Clocks were no longer used to measure time. The distant whisper of the sun rubbing against stone and the thud of guard boots served as indicators. Marie Antoinette lived in a small, damp chamber where wetness clung to everything, even her skin and the walls and blankets. Her bed was a stack of straw. Her lone companion was a single candle. She was required to dress and undress behind a wooden screen that divided the room in half, but even this small amount of solitude was prohibited. She was denied the opportunity to remain invisible as 2 soldiers kept surveillance all day and night. She dozed off beneath their gaze. She consumed food beneath their eyes. It was more than just control surveillance. It served as a reminder that she was merely a body under security and no longer a mother, queen, or even human. Outside news faded into twisted muttering, echoes from a world that had moved on without her. One recollection, however, was still brutally vivid. One wound that will not heal. The recollection of Louis Charles, her son. Just 1 month prior, rebels had broken into his room after midnight in the Temple prison in an attempt to find the young prince. Marie Antoinette had flung herself at him and begged fervently, "He's only a child." Her sobs were meaningless. The frightened 8-year-old was pulled from her arms as the guards tore her away. His cries were stuck in her head, repeating over and over in the shadows. She was never going to see him again. That night, something inside her broke, not the queen, but the mother. A small photograph of her son and a lock of his hair were among the few items she concealed from the guards inside her corset. It was her relic, the final glimmer of tenderness in an angry world. Rosalie Lealier, a teenage servant tasked with taking care of her, was her sole source of human kindness. Rosalie later admitted that the queen only sobbed when she mentioned her kids. A distraught mother was seen saying her children's names like a prayer as the royal facade crumbled. For her captors, even this weakness turned into a game. They made fun of her, made crude remarks to harass her, and laughed over her husband's execution. Each slur was intended to hurt her. She tried to resist with each stillness. However, Marie Antoinette started turning her suffering into defiance in that oppressive confinement. She acquired the skills of speaking quietly, moving slowly, and displaying no fear. Those observing her anticipated a broken woman. Rather, they observed a person who retained an odd, tacit authority while being deprived of their crown and title. She occasionally gazed at the quivering flame of her candle as the rest slept. She relived every moment of her life in its dim light, including the lavish parties, the embroidered dresses, her kids giggling in the palace gardens, and the growing bitterness that had been building outside Versailles. When had everything started to fall apart? When did they cease to be human beings and become into hateful symbols? Dawn was the only response that ever came. And with it, another day spent in that little coffin made of stone. She heard the city sellers yelling, revolutionary drums, the distant bells of Enem, reminding her that life went on without her, from beyond the walls. Thus, 76 days went by, with 76 dawns devoid of hope. The woman, who was previously hated by the entire country, lost all that made her human during those arduous weeks. However, something unexpected emerged from that stripping. A calmness that is almost sacred. Only those who have already lost everything and have nothing left to fear exhibit this dignity. The cell door then reopened in October. This time, she will be brought to trial rather than a child. On October 14, 1793, in the early morning hours, the iron door opened once more. This time, not for food nor for additional guard mockery. This time, the goal was to bring her before the legal system of the revolution. Long before she walked into the chamber, justice had already been etched in stone. Marie Antoinette was escorted by armed soldiers through the concierge's hallways. Their boots resounded like far-off death drums against the stone. She was dressed in the same black clothing that she had worn during her husband's execution. However, she continued to walk with a serene, even unsettling composure. From shadowy corners, others looked at her. Some just looked, caught between fascination and fear, while others spat abuses. Packed with onlookers, the revolutionary tribunal resembled a stage rather than a courtroom. The judges' faces, as stiff and expressionless as carved marble, were illuminated by flickering candles. The former French queen was seated across from them on a simple wooden bench. There were no more jewels or crowns, just a slender, pallid figure with an unwavering ghostly dignity. With a voice intended for spectacle, Prosecutor Antoine Quentin Fouquier Tinville began the proceedings. His remarks were filled with hatred. Each statement is designed to make the audience roar. With theatrical accuracy, he enumerated the charges, which included treason, conniving with foreign adversaries, squandering national funds, and corrupting French morals. Waves of applause, jeers, and pounding fists followed each statement. But facts didn't matter to anyone. The revolution needed a villain, someone to blame for years of taxation, starvation, and conflict. She was also the selected emblem. Marie Antoinette testified only when permitted since she was not given adequate legal representation or time to prepare. Her voice was steady yet low. She disputed the accusations with the weariness of someone who already knew the outcome could not be changed, rather than with indignation. Witnesses came in one after the other. Some told stories that were taken directly from hateful pamphlets. Others made up stories on the spot. They talked about extravagant feasts, mocking parties, and excesses at Versailles. Every made-up scandal was embraced by the audience, who howled in approval. The entire room froze when the charge was made. The prosecutor delivered the most heinous accusation of all, that she had committed incest with her own son, while holding up a sheet of paper and pausing dramatically. The tribunal was engulfed in a terrifying quiet. Some hardened revolutionaries even averted their eyes. The gallery was filled with rumors. Months prior, little Lucy Charles had been torn from her arms and forced to sign a fake confession. He had been trained to recite terrifying words that he was unable to understand, that phrases intended to destroy the mother who cherished him. Marie Antoinette remained motionless for a little moment. She appeared to be carved out of stone, gazing blankly. The judges stood by. The onlookers held their breath. Then she got up. She avoided glancing at the jurors or the prosecutor. Rather, she faced the women in the bat market. Mothers and women, the same ones who had marched beside her to demand bread. She simply stated, "I appealed to all the mothers who are here," in a voice as clear as a bell. She didn't require any further justification. The crowd felt a surge. Gasps, murmurs, even tears. For a little moment, the reality took the place of the hideous parody found in the booklets. An incomprehensibly humiliated mother who was separated from her child. Angry at the change in tone, Tinville pounded his fist on the table and pushed the conversation on. However, something had broken. A few faces in the room showed a glimmer of humanity or possibly guilt. Marie Antoinette collapsed back into her chair, exhausted. She had lost all of her strength in that one instant. The trial lasted for 2 long days. A meticulously planned demonstration of revolutionary strength. Every inquiry, witness, and piece of evidence was a part of a play with a predetermined conclusion. The judges rendered their decision on October 16 at first light. Guilty of high treason. The punishment is guillotine death. If she had anything to say, the cashier asked. "What more could I add?" she murmured, shaking her head. The farce was finished. However, her silent acquiescence turned into a kind of resistance in that instant. No yelling, pleading, or resentment. There was just a lady who stood more erect than the men who condemned her, as though her silence was more truthful than anything she said in court. She was escorted back to her cell that afternoon. The crowd's joyful yells, accusations, and applause persisted behind her. The last morning of her life was in front of her that on October 15, 1793, night settled over Paris, creating a false sense of peace over cell number 280 of the Conciergerie. Even the sound of the water falling sounded like a clock signaling her final hours due to the intense quiet. After her trial, Marie Antoinette was pale and shaky. Her eyes, however, appeared oddly serene. Not the glimmer of optimism, but someone who has come to terms with the end. Her devoted servant, Rosalie, remained near. She offered her bread and broth. With a soft grin, the queen declined. "My child, I don't need anything more. For me, everything is complete." She sat at the little wooden table for a long time, watching shadows move over the wet wall. Outside, the sun muttered. Beyond the door, guards pace. She then grabbed a sheet of paper and a quill. Her hand trembled, but her script didn't. The only person she still felt genuinely attached to was her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth, to whom she wrote a letter. She also wrote nothing about fear, retaliation, or the unfairness she had experienced in that letter. She discussed forgiveness in her writing. She pleaded with her sister-in-law to take good care of her daughter, to pray for young Louis Charles, and to never hold him accountable for the words he was made to utter. Those who wanted to punish her had deceived him and used him as a toy. Her voice became softer. "Let him know that I don't blame him. Inform him that I will pray for him. Assure him that I will remain his mother in paradise." Her spirit seemed to gradually separate from her weary body with each statement. The letter turned into her last message to the world and her moral testament. However, the intended recipients of her message never got it. It was taken by revolutionaries and concealed in their hateful archives for over 20 years before it was discovered. She put down the quill and gazed at the candle, which was barely alive. The table was covered in melted wax that resembled falling tears. Rosalie also became upset when she saw it. The queen whispered to her, "Do not cry. We must die as we have lived decently." Our footsteps came back at midnight. The last order has been delivered. The tone in which the guards gave it was so unremarkable and icy that it could have passed for a morning announcement. Marie Antoinette merely gave a nod. No begging for forgiveness, no shudder of terror. She requested a moment to herself before they closed the door. She knelt and prayed for her kids, not for herself. She was neither a queen nor a symbol at that time. She was just a mother getting ready to let go. Dawn was slipping through the wall crack by the time she got up. Paris was awakening, unconcerned with her grief. People in the streets talked about bread, politics, and the impending execution without realizing that the woman, who had previously been the focal point of Europe's most opulent court, was discreetly wiping her cheeks, adjusting her hair, and getting ready for death with strange composure. Rosie heard her mumble, "May God give me the strength to die with courage." Before she fell asleep for a little while, the candle then extinguished. Like a fading promise, its last brightness lingered in the shadows. Marionette did not dream when the night engulfed the jail. She just bided her time. The sound of bolts clanging signaled the end of the wait at morning. The day has arrived for France's most despised lady to demonstrate her inner power one more time. Paris awoke on October 16, 1793, in the midst of a dense, freezing fog, as if even the sky was hesitant to see what lay ahead. The former queen in cell 280 stirred prior to the arrival of the guards. With her head resting on the same table where the unread letter was still lying, she had barely slept for a few minutes. Rosalie showed up carrying a cup of water and swollen eyes. "Your Majesty, would you like breakfast?" Marie Antoinette shook her head softly. "No, I won't need anything more once I'm gone. I've had enough grief." The locks changed at precisely 6 in the morning. The door opened. The jailer firmly declared, "It is time." Behind him, 3 men came in. A National Guard commander, a clerk, and Charles Henry Sanson, the executioner, along with his helpers. Everything had been planned, even down to the tiniest gesture, a ritual of taking away her remaining dignity. She was told by a guard that she needed to change. It was an easy order. Take off the black morning gown she had been wearing since her spouse passed away. There was more to that outfit than just fabric. It served as her last link to the life that had been taken from her, her memories, and her symbol. Silently, she requested privacy. "Let me have at least that, sir." The guard chuckled. "This place is devoid of queens." While everyone watched, she had to change behind an awkwardly positioned screen. They gave her a simple, scratchy white linen gown, the color of penitence on the verge of death. The contrast was brutal. The woman who had previously worn jewels and silk now appeared almost ghostly in an outfit that wasn't her own. Sanson moved forward after she was done, speaking in a disconnected and flat tone. "Madam, you need to cut your hair." She didn't object. She just lowered her head. Once decorated with rings and jewels, her hands curled silently across her skirt. Using rusty scissors, one of her assistants viciously chopped off sections of her hair. Like pieces of her history, white strands dropped to the ground. Her once blonde hair had been bleached by time and anguish while she was incarcerated. Cutting was more than simply preparation. It was the last stage before oblivion, a rite of removing her femininity. Sanson dropped the hair without another look after it was finished. A guard with a hefty rope came over. "We have to bind your hands." Stunned, Marie Antoinette looked up. "But the king, my spouse, was unbound." Her voice was mournful rather than rebellious. There was no response. The rope bit into her skin because it was knotted so firmly around her wrists that a moan of pain was swallowed by her. She made a request that was previously unthinkable for a queen before departing. "Could I take a moment to relieve myself?" They gave a contemptuous nod. The humiliation was total. The tiniest human behavior had been incorporated into the show. The men stood up when she returned to the room. Sanson stated gravely, "We must go." Marie Antoinette hesitated in front of Rosalie. The young lady shuddered and was unable to speak. The queen gave her a sympathetic glance. "Don't cry for me. I've endured too much suffering to be afraid of dying. May God continue to bless you." She then moved in the direction of the hallway. Whispers, footsteps, and fear filled the Conciergerie's hallway. The soldiers took off their hats as she got closer. Nobody was brave enough to look her in the eyes. It had nothing to do with fear. It was an unintentional act of respect. There was something about her that required silence. When she arrived at the main gate, she spotted the cart, an open, rough wooden wagon similar to those used by thieves and criminals, waiting for her. She was not an exception. Her husband had been transported in a locked carriage to his demise. She was put on exhibit. The skin was harshly bitten by the morning air. The growing yells of people already crowding the streets mixed with the NM bells. With her wrists still chained, she climbed into the cart on her own. She raised her face briefly to the gray sky, took a deep breath, and said something that only Rosalie could hear. "Now my peace begins." The doors of the courthouse creaked open. The cart started to move through the throng. She was pursued by jeers, taunts, and laughing, yet she remained immobile and upright, as if she were no longer a part of the live world. Her trip to the plaster revolution had come to an end. Driven by 2 weary horses, the wooden wagon creaked through the streets of Paris. Its sides were smeared with mud and remnants of former inmates. Marie Antoinette stood tall inside it, her neatly trimmed hair and simple white gown being pulled by the wind. She appeared to be the final act in a tragedy whose conclusion was already known. It took a little more than an hour to travel slowly from the Conciergerie to the square that it turned into a procession for the thousands of people gathered by the roadside. They wanted to watch her fall and be shattered. Some people insulted each other. Some threw away stale bread. They said, "There goes the widow cape." The Austrian is known as the thief of France. However, the majority of onlookers weren't bothered by her appearance. It was her quiet. She didn't respond. She didn't bow her head. She didn't cry. Her gaze was fixed far ahead, her stance was straight, and her demeanor remained composed. Despite the chilly wind blowing over her short hair, she remained composed. Her profile that day, according to artists and chroniclers, showed a melancholy, disturbing serenity, a woman who had already come to terms with her ending, rather than haughtiness that a young man with keen features watched closely from a balcony. The revolutionary painter, Jacques David, opened his sketchbook that he outlined her features, including her long neck, solid jaw, and calm but vacuous eyes. He was attempting to depict not only her body but also the exact point at which myth and history converged. That drawing would go on to become one of the most famous representations of her demise. With lines of soldiers watching over it, the cart proceeded up Rue Saint-Honor. As it went by, windows opened and banged shut. While some observed her with outright contempt, others did so with constrained, guilty respect. Beneath the sound of church bells, merchant screams, and hoof clatter, the city appeared to be holding its breath. Dust was blown into the air by a blast of wind. Over a stone, the wagon jerked violently. Marie Antoinette staggered and almost fell. The crowd began to mutter. However, she straightened herself without assistance, raising her chin as if nothing had happened. The market women nearby, the same ones who had previously marched to Versailles and demanded bread, kept a careful eye on her. While some stared silently, others grinned cruelly. One murmured, "She doesn't look afraid." Another whispered back, "Maybe she has nothing left to lose." The trip seemed to go on forever. She was surrounded like a cyclone by the cacophony of the metropolis. She was motionless on the inside, though. She experienced a new, unexpected feeling while the spectators witnessed a humiliated queen. She felt liberated for the first time in years. Free from politics, the court, poisonous rumors, expectations, and even fear itself. The scene, the plaster revolution, opened before her as the cart rounded its last corner. The guillotine stood in the middle, looming against the pale sky. In the midday light, the shiny metal blade and dark oak frame made a sharp silhouette. The platform was surrounded by a sizable crowd that was giddy with excitement that a roar erupted from their murmur. Marie Antoinette raised her chin. Everything else vanished for a split second. She felt an unanticipated calmness as the wind caressed her face. She realized that on that wooden platform, everything she had ever been, queen, wife, mother, would come to an end. However, she was also aware that the men who had dragged her there were no longer the owners of her story. The cart came to a halt. Charles-Henri Sanson, the executioner, resigned first, then his assistants. One extended his hand to assist her in going down. "No, thank you," she said quietly, meeting his gaze. "I'm capable of handling things alone." Amid the din of the crowd, she climbed down from the cart with her feet steady and her wrists shackled. The final notes of a melancholy symphony resounded with each step towards the wooden stairway. Shouts, fists raised, scornful laughter, and the icy curiosity that arises when an era passes away in front of thousands of people filled the square. With its blades sparkling in the sunlight, the guillotine stood silently and prepared overhead. Marie Antoinette gazed at it. Her eyes were filled with a strange, almost unearthly peace instead of dread. She walked carefully up the stairs. Her steps were unsteady due to her bound hands, but she declined help. Sanson, the executioner, moved forward to lead her, and in that moment, fate performed its final cruel trick. Her foot touched his as she turned. Everything froze for a heartbeat. Just before she said her last words, the executioner gave her a shocked look. Soft, almost delicate, and clear. "Please pardon me, sir. I didn't intentionally do it." No yelling, no swearing, no frantic begging. Even those who had come to celebrate her death were taken aback by the modest and humane apologies. That little act turned out to be her final victory. The mother, who had lost her identity, her children, her crown, and even her name, recovered her dignity, the one thing her adversaries could never take away, in that one breath. She was placed on the wooden plank by the attendants. Anticipation tightened the air surrounding the scaffold. A voice called out from somewhere in the crowd. "Cheers to the Republic." In unison, many roared back. Sans Sun signaled. The device broke. A metallic, harsh sound. The blade struck with merciless accuracy. A heartbeat later, her body became still. In front of the crowd, the executioner raised her head by its pale hair. The area was filled with a violent cheer. Long live the country. Liberty, long live. They saw it as the revolution's triumph. It was a release for her. Later, some witnesses remarked that they had noticed something strange, a peaceful expression that seemed unaffected by violence that lingered on her face. Others said that as soon as the blade fell, the sky darkened, as if everyone in the city was holding their breath. Her body was put in a covered carriage with the bodies of the people who had been put to death before her. No coffin, no rites, and no prayers. She was transported to the Mélines cemetery and interred with strangers in a mass grave. There was only dirt and silence, no flowers to commemorate the location, no cross to honor her name. Eventually, the crowd broke up. Only the hollow echo of the guillotine's trapdoor closing remained after the thud of marching feet subsided. Unaware that history had just changed, several people stayed on the balconies and rooftops, gazing at the vacant area where a queen had fallen. However, her tale didn't stop there. Her memories refused to remain underground even after they buried her like a criminal. Whispered in the face of death, that silent apology to her executioner gradually became a symbol that humanity can persevere even in the face of extreme cruelty. The alien Queen Marie Antoinette, who was held responsible for all misfortunes, passed away with a dignity that no knife could shatter. Her life was taken by the guillotine, but her spirit survived. As soon as the steel hit her neck, her nobility transcended her own terrible era, the shouting of the crowd, and the hostility. She regained her rightful throne in that one moment, her immortal second. The shouts subsided as the square cleared. The scaffold was silent under the gloomy Paris sky. Her remains, now unknown, was taken to the Mélines cemetery, where the revolution's victims were buried in nameless graves. Under the weight of the earth, strangers, thieves, and queens are all equal. Nobody knew where she lay for years. Her name was purposefully removed from official documents. The revolutionaries thought they had put an end to her story. Symbols, however, cannot be buried. As time went on, her passing started to become legendary. It was reported that a young sculptor was called upon to depict her characteristics following her execution. Marie Antoinette, who would go on to become Madame Tussaud, used plaster and wax to shape her face. Long after her adversaries had vanished into thin air, a gesture born of art and sick fascination kept her likeness intact. Many of the revolution's founders were consumed by it. Robespierre collapsed. Tribunals were disbanded. The guillotine's thunder subsided. And the victims gradually became martyrs as France looked for its identity among the ashes. The brother of Louis V, 16th, now monarch Louis V, 6th, ordered a search for the monarch and queen's remains in 1815, more than 20 years after her passing. 2 skeletons were discovered buried among nameless bones and hardened earth in a neglected area of the Mélines cemetery. Marie Antoinette was identified by her bound wrists and fragments of white fabric. At last, her remains were taken to the Basilica of Saint-Denis, where French kings are buried. Finally, the queen who had been refused a tomb was granted one. Even still, her narrative did not really end there, because something more profound endured beyond the monuments, charges, and stories. The dichotomy of a woman who represented both misery and privilege. Marie was neither a saint nor the monster that her adversaries had envisioned. She represented a time when anger and terror had transformed society. She was given an odd immortality by those who attempted to obliterate her. Her last deed. As a silent lesson, an apology is given to the man who was about to kill her. One way to resist is via compassion. The queen's life came to an end as a result of losing everything: her identity, her children, and her reign. Nevertheless, she acquired dignity, the one thing that no force on earth can take, in the last heartbeat when steel and flesh collided. Centuries will go by. Empires will fall. Names won't be remembered. However, there will always be a whisper in every story of injustice and power struggles. There once was a woman who gracefully faced the world's hatred. Please help the channel by subscribing and liking the video if this story touched you. For generations, Marie Antoinette has been condemned but little comprehended. Post your opinions about her in the comments. She is remembered as a name in history. What do you recall about her?